Hi everyone. Today I have a special guest, Kat Hobater. Kat is a primatologist from the UK. She works on social behavior in wild chimpanzees and particularly interested in the role of gestures play in communication.
Mhm.
Kat, hello. Thank you so much for coming today.
Hey, Danny, nice to talk to you today.
All right, so just to give my listeners a little explanation for today.
Hmm.
I'll try to achieve two things today. I'll give Kat the floor and the microphone, and we'd like to hear about your work in terms of the dictionary project,
Hmm.
understanding Primus gestures,
Hmm.
and after that, I will have some questions, and then I would like to introduce a theory I'm developing about human cognitive evolution. And I'd like to hear your feedback. I'm not a professional in the matter, so it would be good for me to help me think through things and see where is this maybe going. All,
Yeah.
all right, Kat. The floor is yours. You can feel free to share the screen or just talk about it in general.
Yeah, I'll just talk about it in general. So one of the things that has always intrigued me is that when we think about human language and human communication, as a species, we have what I would call a speech bias. So we think of language and speech as being one and the same thing, but actually, it's always worth remembering that we can communicate language in lots of modalities. We can do it with speaking. We also, when we're speaking, I especially use a lot of gestures with my hands. We have facial expressions. Um, but we're not tied to speech to communicate language in. We can actually communicate language through signed language, through written language. So when we think about language, we're not talking about a modality like speech. We're talking really more about a system for sharing and exchanging concepts and ideas and information and meaning between partners. Um, and when we think about the other ape species, so chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans, one of the really interesting things is that they have, just as we do, they have vocalizations, they have gesture, they have body posture and facial expression. But whereas we would do the heavy lifting of back and forth meaning exchange in speech by default, sign language if somebody can't access speech, but speech by default, other apes do it in gesture. And it took us a little bit of a while as a field to realize this. So it was, there were good reasons why when we started to look at the communication of other primate species, we often looked at their vocalizations, their calls. But it was really this step change for our field when we realized how crucial gesture was for other apes in particular. And actually, we started to recognize a lot of the structures and features that we have in language in ape gesture, the kinds of things that we'd actually been looking for in ape vocalizations and not finding for decades. And so, ape gesture is this amazingly rich system. The other apes, chimpanzees, for example, have maybe at this point, we're at over 150 different gestures. Those gestures have meanings that are given with intention. What I mean by that is that lots of information gets put out there into the world. You could read my facial expressions, you could read my body posture and infer what kind of information that's giving. But it's not the same as when I'm choosing to share information with you. Um, and what we see with ape gesture is that they're exchanging them backwards and forwards in a meaningful, intentional way, the way that we might in a conversation with language. One of the other beautiful but also frustrating things about ape gesture is like language, its meanings are flexible and dynamic. So um, in English, for example, the word bark could mean a dog bark or tree bark or even a small ship, although it's spelled differently then. And we infer which meaning I'm intending to communicate depending on the context. What are the words? What are we talking about? Am I walking in a park? Am I doing some gardening? Am I at the dog store? So there's lots of different ways we infer which meaning we use. But it's very different from, for example, most other animal communication systems where if you have an alarm call that means eagle, you don't want any ambiguity. You don't want someone thinking, which version of is it eagle? Is it leopard? I don't know what the alarm call is for. So most other animal systems of communication are highly fixed. except once again, gesture. And gestures can also be flexible that way, where one gesture can have multiple meanings for a chimpanzee that uses it. So something like a big loud scratch could mean, I'd like you to start grooming me. It can mean, I'd like to start grooming you, but it can also mean, let's travel, a completely different meaning. But the chimpanzees are inferring based on context, based on relationship and shared kind of social understanding, which meaning is being used. And I don't think we realize just how difficult a job this is that we're doing, because we do it all the time with language. It's so natural to us to
Mhm.
co-construct meaning in the moment. The example that I often use is if you're driving at night and somebody flashes the headlights of their car, you could do that for lots of different reasons. It could be because there's danger around the corner. It could be because there's a problem with your car, but it could also just be a friend saying hello on a country road. And we very quickly infer in each instance of use, oh, it means that's a friend. I recognize the car. Or I don't recognize the car. There's no problem with my car. There must be danger up ahead, or, like I should slow down. So just the same signal being used in the same way with the same context between two individuals can be meaning can be co-created. It's a shared act between both sides, both partners in that exchange. So it's inherently social. Meaning is socially constructed in that way. And I think this for me is where, in terms of what we're doing with ape gesture now going forwards, where things get really interesting for us, because what we've done traditionally with most animal communication systems in the past is to go, what are the different signals in the repertoire? What are the units? So something like, what are the words? What are the syllables? Um, what information do they have? What meanings do they have? How are they combined? We look at what I call the tools in the toolkit, but we do it on a general basis. So across all uses of this one gesture, what does it mean? Or whenever you combine A and B and A, what does it mean? And what we typically haven't done is say, well, on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, when Frank was gesturing to Flora and he used a hand fling, what did that mean on that occasion? And I know that Frank is Flora's youngest son, that he's now alpha male of the community. So there's all of this social information, all of this context that's really important to that interaction that helps me decode what they meant when Frank gave that hand fling to Flora, that could be completely different if he was to give it to somebody else, or even to Flora, but on a different day, perhaps. And I think for me, this noise, all of this messiness, all of this variation that we have often spent years trying to average out and get rid of in our data sets, I think that's where the really interesting questions lie. And I also think it will help us to make more meaningful comparisons with what we do with language, because this is fundamentally how we use language in an interesting way every day for storytelling, for, gossiping about people. It's not just for sharing of information in a very kind of flat way. So we've been spending the last, well, for me, it's been about 2 decades exploring these questions, but I feel we're really just starting to get to the interesting stuff now.
Wow. That's really amazing. I really appreciate your work. I've been following um, some of the things you've written and the talks. There's several talks you gave, and there is the dictionary project,
Mhm.
which is really amazing. It's, I think, like you said, maybe 150 really short clips of gestures that the apes are doing. And I was wondering if you can just quickly like shoot out like 10 examples if you
Mhm.
can. Sorry for tackling you, but I think it would be really helpful for me and the listeners to get a sense. Like you said, okay, scratching the arm can mean both, can you groom me or let's go for a walk, I think you said.
Mhm. Yeah,
So if
exactly.
you can shoot like a few more of those, that's really helpful.
I mean, some of them will be very familiar to us, and that's because we're also apes. We share the same bodies as the other apes, and
Right.
so a hand fling literally means shoo, go away for another ape, just as it would for us if you're kind of, like you would have reaching out your arm towards someone. And actually, for us, it took a few years, embarrassingly in retrospect, to realize that it's not just about reaching out your arm, but about the orientation of your palm. So we used to just code these as reaches. Then we realized that this, as it would in humans, would be to ask you to give me something. So it's like a sort of begging reach, we would call if the palm is up.
Mhm.
But chimpanzees will also extend a reach in greeting. But when they greet someone, they typically just flip their wrist a little bit. So it's kind of turned and covered.
Interesting.
Um, they will be, but again, these, like reaching, arm raising, raising your arm up. Although for a chimpanzee, that doesn't signal, attention or an answer in class the way that it does for us. It
Right.
typically might mean something like move closer or a request to approach somebody. And so you get it from a young infant that might want to nurse from the mother, or you also get it from a big adult male who's inviting someone to groom, and maybe they're a little hesitant to approach him. And so one of the things that I find interesting is, again, you get so you get these shared core actions, something like a raise, but I can produce a raise with one arm or two. I could bend my wrist at the kind of like I could do all kinds of slight variations on the expression of the same or similar gesture action. And that's something where we're looking at, I think this and this looks different, but maybe a chimpanzee treats it as being the same thing. So we have to start to ask ourselves from the chimpanzee's perspective, what does it mean? And
Mhm.
that's where our project, which it used to be an in-joke in the lab that we called it the Great Ape Dictionary because we couldn't come up with a better word. And then we just decided to stick with it because it just describes what we're trying to do. Um, but trying to get to this idea of looking really at how the chimpanzees are using them. So not just making assumptions of, to me, this looks different. A good example is that chimpanzees will drum, but they could be hitting an object in synchrony, or they could be doing it asynchronously. And we, for years, like many people studying gesture in apes and communication in apes, used to code these as two separate things. And when we studied the chimps' own behavior and their responses to them, it looks like for the chimps, it's exactly the same. It has we haven't found a difference yet in how they understand it. So I think we have some gestures can be familiar to us, and that can lead us almost down a sort of false path of assuming that because it's familiar to us, the chimps might be using them in the same way or paying attention to the same features. So it's always worth, there are big advantages because we share the same bodies. We have this ability to imagine what it might be like to produce and receive these signals, but we have to be careful. I mean, the same is true in different human cultures, right? So if
Right.
I show the palm of my hand, it could mean stop. In especially, let's say, European cultures, this would be stop. Whereas in some East and South Asian cultures, showing the palm of your hand is really offensive. And so
Right.
like something that, we've got this sort of flexibility built in, but we shouldn't be, just as we shouldn't make cultural assumptions, we shouldn't make speciesist assumptions from our human perspective, at least where we can. But yeah, one of the beautiful things about the similarities that we have and the familiarity of these gestures is we've recently done two projects. One is saying, well, all of these other apes are using these gestures. They're often sharing them. So a chimpanzee and bonobo uses mostly the same gestures, and chimps, bonobos, and gorillas use many of the same gestures. So
Across the world.
across all of the groups that we've looked at so far, and that's one of our big projects in the last few years. Until recently, we had really only looked at communication in one or two chimpanzee groups, maybe one gorilla group, and it's a little bit like only studying language in St. Andrews or in the village in Uganda. And we needed to get many more data points to really say, well, this is what all chimps do, or this is how the Ugandan chimps do it, this is how the Ivorian chimps do it. What are the different dialects or expressions? And so, just as with humans, there are some similarities and some differences, but many of these gestures seem to be shared, but we were not necessarily thinking that we would continue to use those gestures because we have spoken language or signed language. So we said, what happens if we look at young children, 1, 2, 3-year-olds who know how language works, but who don't have all of the vocabulary yet? And we actually found that those young children are using a lot of the ape gestures, at least 50 of them so far in their own communication.
Mhm.
So we still really do have access to this system that is shared across all apes. And it's not that language replaced it in humans so much as language kind of got woven into it in humans. And we just use it a little bit differently at different times, probably.
Mhm. Um, it sounds really challenging because like you said, you managed to figure out, let's say, 150 words, let's call it, for lack of a better term, and then the question becomes much more like it's like 150 times 150, right? Now you're almost like, I don't know at what number it is, like million of options
Mhm.
out there. And I'm almost curious. Well, one quick question was, since there's a lot of body language and hand motion, I'm curious to ask, do apes seems to look more at each other arms and bodies? Or is that true?
Right. So it's a really good question. And it's not been something that we've been able to look at in detail in the wild. I know that there are a couple of eye tracking studies in captivity where they've shown that apes tend to have attention towards actions and movements of the body, and chimpanzees particularly, whereas, say, young children and sometimes bonobos show a little bit of this, they'll tend to like pay attention to the face.
Mhm.
Um, and so it's worth one of the things that I wanted to do was at the moment we've tended to look at young children who are hearing speaking children. So using spoken language. I think a really interesting thing to do would be to look at where are the biases if you have young children who are brought up in sign language families, because then we would know, is this a species difference or is this a difference of tending to grow up with a physical modality of expression as opposed to a vocal modality of expression as being the salient one to pay attention to.
Mhm.
Um, so ape gesture is not the same as sign language in any way, but they're expressed in that same modality. And so I'm really curious to know a little bit more about that. But we're just starting to ask those kind of questions.
Yeah. One of the things I noticed in the dictionary project, there is all these little clips, but you never really say what they mean. I'm sure you assume what they mean, but maybe there is this hesitation since we may be using our human glasses, right? And assigning it meaning based on what we think it means.
Mm.
Um, and then putting that next to what we said about the having 150 times 150, that's like so many. So I'm almost tempted to ask, do you feel like maybe there is so much options out there and all these videos from the wild, they are so crude in a way, right? It's like they're running around and there's so many things going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you're using like AI and software to break every small movement.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like really challenging. I don't know if you have any prediction for the future. Where would you see the field goes in like another generation or two?
Um, So part of the reason that we don't put the meanings up on the website or on the dictionary project is because we actually have quite a few different community science projects where what we wanted to be able to do was ask people if they could guess what the gestures meant. And so we've
Right.
always kept it separate. You can kind of go and read the papers and make the connections, but we wanted to make it a little bit difficult to make those connections. And it's why the videos are so short. It's just the gesture. And you see no context before, no outcome afterwards, just to make it so that we weren't going to essentially prevent us from being able to ask big. I mean, the last time we did a Great Ape Dictionary community science project, 15,000 people took part, which was amazing because it gave us a real sense of this is a robust finding, but so we've been cautious about making it too easy to find the meanings for that reason. But
Mhm.
we are definitely at the very crudest of crude stage with meaning. I think with motion and gesture and being able to separate out different types of units within the gestural repertoire, we're doing quite well. But at the moment, the way that we look at meaning, so I could just look at meaning by saying which context. Are they given when playing? Are they given when traveling? And this doesn't help because if you think of something like language, so that stop gesture that we talked about earlier, um, then I could say stop while we're feeding and while we're traveling and when we're fighting, and it would look from context like it's flexible, but the meaning is actually very specific from the signaler's perspective. So I could also look at what happens next. I could say, okay, a chimp just gave a gesture. What did you do next? What did the recipient do next? there, it's a bit of a problem because just for chimps, as it is for us, sometimes what happens next is they say no or negotiate back or misunderstand or miss. So what we use at the moment as the roughest of proxies is what is the change in behavior by the recipient that stops the signaler from signaling. And the analogy I usually use is if I have a gesture that means pass me the coffee, please, I would keep gesturing and keep gesturing and keep gesturing. And if you pass me the orange juice or something, I would keep gesturing, or I might elaborate and make it more obvious. But the thing that stops me from gesturing is when you pass me the coffee. And it's not when I've started to drink the coffee and get the cat. So it's not stimulus related because I will stop communicating when I know you've understood, even though my goal is not fully satisfied. But that stopping of signaling and what causes the signaling to stop is at least a little bit of a clue into what the signaler wanted to communicate.
Let's see.
And the reason that it's still very crude for a number of reasons really is that it links inevitably to an imperative request for you to do something. So if I have gestures that mean come here, I can see you come here. And if a chimp has a gesture to say, give me that, or move away, or let's play, I see the changes as an observer. If a chimpanzee had a gesture that was saying, what a beautiful sunset, or isn't the food good today, or maybe we should go, and like if these are more declarative, like I'm cold, you don't have to change your behavior to understand that. And so if there are these declarative meanings, we don't know how to access those. We also inevitably, as you were saying, because of our human bias, are going to be attending to the kind of things we can recognize. I'm hungry, I'm cold, I'm tired, I want to travel. But there might be chimp desires and goals that we're not easily recognizing as yet. Um, and so, yeah, there's a long way to go with meaning, and we're still really looking for good methods. And thinking about the future, I mean, there's a lot of excitement at the moment, of course, about large language models and what we can do with them and using AI. And I have two minds about it, and I oscillate backwards and forwards between them because, on the one hand, it's really exciting because we can include so many dimensions of information and look for patterns that are too complicated for us to detect using traditional methods. So we might be able to get nuance or new patterns. A great example of that is they recently found a pattern in whale song that you could only detect because if you remove the spaces, because the pattern was visible over a period of hours. So it's almost as if one syllable takes 3 hours each
Mhm.
time. Now, that's just too long for us to conceive of. But
Right.
the AI was saying there's a pattern here. And the whale scientist
Mhm.
was saying, no, we looked, there's no pattern. And the AI was,
Yeah.
saying, but the AI was reporting that there was a pattern there. So they looked again. And I think that's hopeful. But I think the cost potentially is that the understanding of the species of being in situ, like you can't just give an AI model a bunch of chimp video with no information about who's who, what the relationship is like, the context, the
Mhm.
environment, the social interactions, and
Mhm.
expect it to decode that in a uh, meaningful sense, I think. So we're not yet at the point where the machines can do our work for us, but they might be able to help us look for new things and also do some of the grunt work and just finding some of the basics, hopefully.
Mhm. Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking in my head like maybe the question I asked wasn't the right question. Maybe it's not so much about finding the meaning, but constructing, maybe a good analogy would be music, right? It's like constructing this instrument that makes um, all these sounds, all these notes, all this combination of notes, and maybe the meaning is not so important in a way. It's the song and the tune. Yeah, I'm still trying to put the words for it, but
No, it's a
it's
good
it's 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 also like a dance, right? It's
Mhm.
all of those, like when a dance teacher gives names to all of those, it's really not so much as breaking them apart as putting them together that make
Mm.
the dance what it is. Mm,
Yeah, and you
yeah.
do need you do sometimes, yes, you need all of it. And sometimes it's more than more than we currently have the tools to recognize in terms of the sort of the back and forth or just who's involved. I mean, things that we're not even able to consider yet are not just who's having the dialogue backwards and forwards, but who else is around, because that changes the valence and the meaning. And the reason that I might be laughing at somebody's joke would potentially be because, not because of the joke or the recipient, but because there's someone else there that I want to. So I think the
Okay.
interconnectedness of the social world is so much bigger for chimpanzees as it is for us, or for all apes as it is for
Yeah.
us. Yeah, there's much that we're not yet getting at for sure.
Yeah. I think if there's one force I see in all of nature is that grouping force.
Hmm.
It's something that I see in every society, in even you can say in plants and trees, you can see that certain type of trees are growing within a certain area,
Hmm.
and uh, and there's a certain energy. I like this picture of the football players who all huddle together and talk, and it seems like the center is really where the energy is located.
Hmm.
And I think that, like you said, with one-on-one, right? When people talk to each other, or where it's really like warmth,
Hmm.
it's this familiarity and the
Hmm.
repetition. It's like giving us a sense of calm and
Hmm.
stability that we're all striving for.
Hmm.
And I think it's kind of like the source of um, life is really this finding common ground between like fellow humans or fellow any species it is. All right, so I'm gonna jump into my idea
Hmm.
about, and this is like total layman point of view.
Hmm.
So my thinking is this. I would start with, let's say, 7 million years ago, with
Hmm.
what I would say like proto-Homo species, proto-human. So we can see with apes that they're pounding with rocks
Hmm.
to, let's say, crack the nuts.
Hmm.
So I see that as like the beginning of the process.
Hmm.
Now, I'm sure you're familiar. There's this site from 3.3 million years ago where they discovered these rocks that apparently had been used to hit other rocks
Hmm.
so they can be spliced, and they used those proto-humans used their sharp edges.
Hmm.
They use them for butchering an animal and maybe skinning an animal. So, so I see that as a sort of an extension,
Hmm.
because if you look at an ape holding a rock in his hand, pounding,
Hmm.
in my point of view, he's really almost using his body. The hand holding the rock is really not far removed from the rock.
Hmm.
Another example I use is those birds that fish from the ocean. They dive straight into the water and they get the fish. So so it's very much here and now. I use this term here and now. It seems like the world of animals use their senses
Hmm.
to communicate, to interact with their environment, right? It's like I see you, I hear you, I smell you, I touch you,
Hmm.
and and then whatever is happening to us now is
Hmm.
what's going on.
Hmm.
But with this one rock hitting another rock, I see
Hmm.
that as an extension.
Hmm.
And the second level of the extension is when I build a hammer.
Hmm.
I'm slightly jumping fast forward here. I don't want to take too long. But for me, a hammer is really a true extension
Hmm.
because I'm holding the handle. But as I pound, let's say, the nail,
Hmm.
I'm really focusing on this connection of the rock, let's call it,
Hmm.
with the other object.
Hmm.
But my hand is holding the handle. There's a certain extension in space.
Hmm.
So for me, humans, through the use of the tool,
Mm.
created an extension. And this
Mm.
extension is what I identify as extension of going further from here and now. Now it's
Mhm.
not so much here and now. Now
Mhm.
it's now it's identifying something outside of what I'm holding in my hand.
Mhm.
There's also this, I like to think about the scrambling egg. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
the manual version used to be that you turn this thing, but the scrambling piece turns the other
Different.
direction.
Yeah.
So another um, step that I think happened in this process, there was a moment in time where humans identified an object.
Mm.
And there is a term in children sociology called object permanence.
Mhm.
So it's a process to identify a toddler growing a little bit older. So it like when they're babies and you're covering an object, they don't know it's there, even though they saw it before. But
Yeah.
when they're a little bit older, even though you're covering the object, they know there's something there.
Mm.
And I use the term object permanence a little bit differently. I use
Mhm.
it in the sense that I was pounding the rock earlier today,
Mm.
but I know it's there. I will go later and get the rock because I have more pounding to do.
Mhm.
Or let's see, what was the other thing? Um, Or I'll wake up the following day and I hold this. Let's say I was using a stick and it
Mm.
worked really well. So
Mm.
so I'm gonna keep on holding on to it. I
Mhm.
feel this is an extension of time because I may not use it right now and I may not pay attention to it, but
Mhm.
but I can remember I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna think I'm gonna use it tomorrow, for example.
Mhm.
So I find there's a certain extension.
Mm.
Um, that takes us away from the here and now to something that I don't know what to call it, but it's not here and now.
Mhm.
It's further away.
Yeah.
And I feel like um it's built into this idea that there are objects, and that's when
Mhm.
object naming didn't necessarily start with language, by the way. It could
Mm.
have been just the pointing that was starting to occur.
Mhm.
And identifying this object started, I think, this process that I call it like thought extension. So with thought extension, I feel like we can expand um, our way of interacting with our surrounding. It's no longer only what I hear and what I smell and what I touch.
Mhm.
It's another layer of ability to interact with my surroundings and
Mhm.
to put things together,
Mm.
because the final step, so to speak, is that after I created, let's say, the 150 words, right?
Mm.
Now I can start putting words together, and
Mm.
that's a whole other level, right?
Mhm.
That's almost like where we are with the Homo sapiens, right? It's like this this ability to say combination of words like
Mhm.
low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
We're still using words that are individually define physical objects or a real reality environment.
Mhm.
But once you put them together, you create a whole other meaning to
Mm.
them. Or like don't round the corners, right?
Mhm.
Rounding the corners is really two physical components that when I put them together, so as further away we developed with this extension, we keep getting further away from the
Mhm.
here and now. Like I can
Mhm.
spend my whole day listening to lectures,
Mhm.
thinking about something I'm going to do tomorrow.
Mhm.
I'm almost never going to say, okay, let's look out the window and see what's out there, or let's listen to the birds singing.
Mhm.
It's almost like um, Sure, I can do that for a minute or two, but then I'm gonna go back into, okay,
Mm.
yesterday this happened, and tomorrow I'm gonna meet this person. We're almost not living in here and now. We're living in something. I think we need a word for it. I don't know,
Mhm.
maybe. So so that's basically my spiel.
Okay.
Um, so now I have a series of questions for you. You
Mm.
can answer quickly. I know we're reaching towards the end. So the first one is this interaction with objects.
Mm.
Do you ever observe, let's say, a chimpanzee um, going back to the same rock? Or, because I know, for example, that the famous example is that they fish the termites with a
Mhm.
stick. But what I
Mhm.
observed, and maybe you can correct me, once they finish using the stick, they
Mhm.
simply let go,
Mm.
and there's no more need for the stick, so there's no more stick in
Mm.
their conscious, which is sort of like what I was saying about the here and now. There's no more stick, so
Mm.
it's gone. Would you What's your take on that?
I I think first of all, I do think that chimpanzees and other apes live more in the here and now than you or I do. I'm not sure that that was true. I'm not sure that's true of everyone today, and I'm not sure that was true of us in our relatively recent past. But I would say that, so for example, when you were thinking about those extensions of your, like, as you said, like picking up a stone is kind of just an extension of my fist, but like a little bit harder, right?
Yeah.
But when they're taking sticks and things, they're shaping that tool into a very specific tool. They might make a little brush on one end. And most of those kind of tools that are perishable, when you use them once, they're done because they're not useful as a tool anymore. They actually sometimes will make multiple tools in one event because they're just too fragile. But some chimpanzees, for example, there will be bees' nests that are completely underground. What you need then is a toolkit. You have a big strong stick that you use to perforate the hole. Then you put this to one side and you come with your fishing one and you can fish in it. Now, those big strong perforation sticks can be used time and again, and they will be. They're available to you for the next time and the next time. And the same with stones. So each chimpanzee that nut cracks with a stone has a preferred stone often amongst the ones available. They will sometimes pick up a stone on the way to a nut cracking site. So I know I need to, that's a great stone. I like that stone. I'm going to take it with me because I'm going to the nut cracking site, even though I'm not at the site yet. I mean, not over great distances, but over some. So I think we already, in some cases of tool use, have a little step away from the real here and now.
Yes, yes. I think for
But
sure apes do exhibit that extension. Sorry to
I
interrupt.
think the most impressive version of it that I can think of, and this is a good example of I did not think about this until other people told me about it because it's not something that it's not the way we interact with the world, but chimpanzees have an amazing spatial map of their territories. And so they know where each feeding tree is. What is hyper impressive beyond this, keeping a mental map of all of the feeding trees, is they will track the stage of ripening it's at. So if I pass a tree and I see, oh, those fruits might be ripe in 1 week. So they'll remember this information. Even more impressively, if it was wet and cold, they don't go back after 1 week, they go back after 10 days. If it's hot and super sunny, they go back after 5 days.
Mm.
So they have now. Maybe that's something that's very present for them, but they maintain in their heads a mental map with very nuanced spatial information. And to the extent that they will build their nest and go to sleep the night before on the way to breakfast. So they will deviate thinking about my plan for tomorrow morning is to go eat
Mhm.
over there. So I'm going to go a little bit closer tonight already and make my nest so I can get up early and go there. And
Mhm.
so I think there are nice examples of thinking forward a little, thinking back a little. Um, I mean, it's true. One of the things that we've looked at occasionally is saying hello and saying goodbye. Because chimpanzees, like humans, we fission and fuse through the day. We see people and then we don't see them for the day, or we don't see them for a month, or we might see them in 5 minutes. Um, and chimpanzees will greet very elaborately, but they don't tend to say goodbye. And some people had used that to argue that when somebody's not there, they don't exist anymore for the chimp, right? It's not very relevant if they're not around.
Mhm.
But the way I think of it is a little differently, which is that chimpanzees have a way of staying tied together almost in the moment,
Mhm.
um, that is basically through a vocalization or a drum over 1 kilometer of distance. I can hear a call, and I know that's Frank, or I know that's McAllen. So
Mhm.
as a chimpanzee, it's not that when someone leaves my field of view, they're gone. I know where you are and what you're doing across a huge spatial area. So I kind of, for me, it feels a little bit like almost like a sort of social network that we have with our phones and with our literal social networks, that we can stay connected even though we're not in the same place because we're connected in that kind of other space that you were explaining we need a word for, right? That's not here and now, but we remain present for each other in a different kind of way. We remain contactable, or somehow I can keep track of you in this other space, this other existence. And I often wonder if our uptake and our very rapid kind of like spread of the use of things like social networks was because it replaced something that we used to have in a sense of never truly being alone. I don't think a chimpanzee in a rainforest is ever on his own in the same way as I might be if I'm walking around the forest. And
Mhm.
maybe that was something that we were looking for, trying to get back. So, sorry, that was a long answer, but it's just to say I think there are interesting glimpses to suggest that there might have been little steps or little ways in which they use it that we don't anymore, or it would be, yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Mhm.
Yeah.
This concept I'm developing like on my own, do you think there is something there to maybe and also do you find it resonating with other researchers or that you know of? Um, what's your thought of what I basically described as this?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think what you're starting to touch on is one step on the way to imagination or abstract concepts. So the kind of things that I do think probably are like characteristically human. The reason that I hesitate to say uniquely human is that you see apes, for example, that were enculturated, raised in a human world. Some individuals seem to be able to engage with the world in that imaginative, in the kind of reasoning that you're talking about. So I wonder how much of this kind of nature nurture interaction you have. That if you take a chimpanzee and you really raise them as if they were human, concepts like Christmas or Wednesday or next month are not out with their reach completely. Like I do think, but it's certainly not the way that I think chimpanzees exist in the world in the wild. And so there's kind of sort of interesting tension at play that you could force. There's enough plasticity in apes that if you squish and squeeze the way in which they think into a very human anthropogenic environment, they can engage with it that way. But it's maybe just not the default mode that we spring back to. So I think there's something in there. I
Mhm.
think we have to remember that, you talked about Lomekwi, the stone tools 3.3 million years ago. We were still using stone tools that were marginally different just a few 100,000 years ago. So everything that we're doing now, Skyping and Zooming on kind of computers in buildings, in offices, that was such a tiny fraction of time that we're
Right.
talking about, right?
Well,
That's the puzzle we have to solve. What was that rapid ratchet, right? Not
I,
the 3 million year point, but a half
I
million year point.
I have a different take on that. For
No.
me, for me, um, throwing a spear was the other example I didn't think of mentioning. This is a
Mhm.
true extension for me of
Mm.
of space and time
Mm.
because I'm throwing something, even if it's not that far, if it's like 10 meters, um, that's something that's happening over there
Mm.
in a few seconds. I
Mhm.
don't I don't know, like maybe you can tell me, do apes throw objects in a way that you can compare to throwing a spear?
The one that comes first to mind is an ape in captivity, but there was a very famous example of a gorilla who used to throw stones at visitors. Very well targeted if they were walking by. More than that, she would make little piles of stones and cache them in places where she thought visitors would be most likely to come later in the day. So she's
Mhm.
thinking ahead, preparing, caching her stones, and then throwing. I mean, apes don't throw overarm, they throw underarm,
Right.
but underarm with good accuracy with these
Yeah.
stones at visitors who were quite a
Yeah.
long distance away. So, but again, it's interesting that these behavioral expressions that we're kind of looking for points of commonality with, the first examples that come to mind are often apes who are living in these human environments
Oh,
that maybe encourage
interesting.
that kind of interaction.
I
So
see.
it becomes this question of they can when they need
Right.
to. Maybe they
Right.
just didn't need to, and we didn't need to until a certain point in time.
Yeah. Another question is about pointing, because it seems
Mm.
to me very useful for humans to point
Mm.
because of the things I mentioned before about object identification, right?
Mm.
So, do apes point?
Yes, but not for the reasons that we do. So,
Another way to pose the question is, do they point and look for eye contact? That was maybe too much, too much to ask, but what do you think of that?
yeah, so young apes will point. So typically not with the index finger, but that's not a human thing either. That's a Western thing. So they'll point using their whole arm. They'll reach.
Hmm.
It's typically, so we used to think that, oh, they're reaching towards another ape, but all of their eye contact is with the individual that they want to help them. So
Hmm.
you get or sometimes towards an object. And when we looked for this, where we said most of the reason that young infants point is to access something they can't access. I want the cookie. I want to go there. I want to be picked up. Um, Young apes don't have this problem. If they want the fruit, they go like we are kind of useless when we're young. Like physically, we're not very good at interacting with the environment independently. Young apes don't have this problem. They want the fruit, they go get the fruit, even if they're 6 months old. But there isn't a physical barrier. Captive apes have physical barriers and they use these pointing reaches frequently. Wild apes don't, but wild apes have social barriers. So I can't go get the fruit or I can't go get this stone for tool use because the alpha male is there or there's another big kind of like subadult there and I don't want to go on my own. So now I want my mom or my older brother and sister to help me. I'm going to indicate by pointing with my arm at the thing that I want, the thing that I'm interested in, but I'm not interacting with that thing or that individual. All of my eye gaze is back to the individual that I'm interacting with. So again, this is one of those things where I think we looked for an expression of pointing that would be familiar to us. I'm pointing to an object that's out of my physical reach, and we didn't see pointing in apes
Hmm.
until we started to conceive of, well, why do they need to point? Well, they need to point for these other things. And then we started to see pointing much more frequently.
Right. Okay. Well, Kat, that was really, really interesting and thought-provoking, and I enjoyed it very much. I really thank you for your time. Um,
No,
good.
thank you for the conversation. I do honestly think that you're circling around an idea that there's something there. But as usual, this has always been my job as a primatologist. People come up with interesting ideas, and I go, my chimps can do that too.
Yeah.
Um, you know,
Well,
but
for sure, on one hand, there is all these differences, right? We're humans, they're not, but there's so much in common. I mean, it's obvious for a layman person like me who's watching those videos, and the interactions between them has this flexibility. I think one researcher said there's animals with flexibility and there's animals who have repetition,
Mhm.
and humans can do both. They can do things together in big groups and they can be flexible. And I think at least, well, a lot of that is really seen in apes as well. Maybe the not in big groups like so
Mhm.
many like us, but I think up to 100 individual apes can conceive of themselves as a group. Would that be accurate?
Even 200. That would be unusual though. So
Right.
typically for chimpanzees,
60 to 80 would be a typical kind of group. And recognizing that I don't see you every day, maybe I only see you once a year, but you're in my group, you're not in that group. So yeah, relatively large numbers.
So I think there's a lot to compare. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, it's nice that there's more work to do. It keeps me running around a rainforest.